Welcome to Visual Literacy, a series of YouTube videos based on the Visual Literacy Workbook for Graphic Design and Fine Art students by David Moyer and Brian Flynn, published by Oxford University Press. Chapter 9, Structure. Structures are internal frameworks that aid in the organization of negative spaces and the creation of harmonic relationships between design elements, providing formal organization to a visual image. In much the same way that our skeletons gives formal organization to our human bodies. Design structures exist prior to the design. The choice of a structure may be the initial step in the creation of a design, though many designs are created without them. Internal design structures may be categorized as formal, a structural network that requires strict adherence to its guidelines, or informal, a structural network where the design elements have a causal relationship to its guidelines. Formal structures are primarily used in graphic design. The most common is the columnar typographic grid, composed of vertical guides dividing the space into columns. Columnar grids used in page layout require images and text to be placed in even increments within the grid to conform to its structural guides. Occasionally, a designer may break conformity to the grid to add variety. Typographic grids may contain few or many compartments in which to place design elements, allowing for more or less flexibility in a design. Grids may be customized to accommodate the requirements of a design by constructing its guidelines to conform to the contours of graphic elements to be used in the design. Informal structures consist of guidelines that provide suggestions for placement of visual elements. Compositions may benefit from exact or approximate conformity to the informal structural guidelines, the viewer's gestalt accommodating the approximate placements. The rebatement of a long rectangle is achieved by projecting the short side of the rectangle onto its long side, forming a square within the rectangle for each projected short side. The interior squares form rebatement containers, which may provide harmonic resting places for visual masses of design elements within the rectangular picture plane. The interior vertical sides of the rebatement containers form rebatement lines, harmonic points of placement for elements of compositional emphasis. The harmonicometer is a compositional guide that offers aid in the harmonic placement of accent points, the eyes of the rectangle, and echo lines that offer placement guides for diagonally oriented design elements. The eyes of the rectangle are formed by 90-degree intersections of diagonal lines projected from the four corners of the picture plane. The echo lines are formed by the projection of two diagonal lines from each corner of the picture plane. The word echo implies a diminished perceptibility of the compositional elements aligning with the diagonal guides in their repetition within the picture plane. The Visual Literacy Workbook for Fine Art and Graphic Design students was designed using a 9-column typographic grid, providing great flexibility for the placement of design elements of varying sizes and proportions. Design elements are fit into multiples of the vertical grid columns. The running chapter vocabulary glossary at the top left of the page occupies 4 vertical grid columns, though varying in column depth depending on the page. The main body of the text spans 5 columns and varies in its column depth depending on the page. The illustrations on this page, Mondrian's composition in red, yellow, and blue, occupy 4 columns beneath the body text, and a diagram representing rectilinear shapes, occupying 2 3/4 grid columns, breaks in its conformity with the column grid in its placement, being centered on the 4 columns directly beneath the running glossary. The illustrations throughout the book occupy from 2 to 9 columns in their placement within the grid. The typographic elements, heads, glossary, body text, captions are distinguished from one another through typographic contrast. Edward Monet makes use of two informal structures, rebatement and the harmonic armature, in the composition of his painting, Boating. A close inspection of the rebatement of the picture plane reveals the alignment of the young woman's upper torso and head with the left rebatement line, furnishing the painting with its second accent point, the male figure being the image's focal point due to its central placement, value contrast, and his eye contact with the viewer. The two figures in the majority of the boat's form fit neatly into the left rebatement container, which houses most of the painting's visual mass. The four eyes of the rectangle within the harmonic armature indicate dynamic points of placement, of emphasis, or visual pause within the painting. Eyes 1, 2, 3, and 4 are on or adjacent to accent points within the composition. Eyes 1 and 3 rest on areas of bright white, high value contrast. Eyes 2 and 4 rest on the relatively isolated hands of the male figure. Echo lines indicate the diagonal orientation of lines of sight within the picture plane. Parallel right-leaning echo lines 1 and 3 align first with the female figure's upper torso and the male figure's right knee and shoulder. Second, with the female figure's shoulder and the male figure's head. Right-leaning echo line 2 aligns with the top left edges of the figure's hats. Left-leaning echo lines 1 and 3 align first with the major axis of the female figure's back and head. Second, with the male figure's lower left leg, upper right arm, and right shoulder. Third, with the male figure's left hand and head. With the sail's boom. Left-leaning echo line 2 aligns first with the female figure's lower leg and the male figure's right knee and the female figure's head and hat. Second, with the inside of the boat and the male figure's fist and shoulder. And third, with the major axis of the boat. The equipoised balance of left and right-leaning diagonals lend dynamic tension to the painting's composition. Please join us as we continue to explore visual form and content in upcoming videos.